The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society. The second Tuesdays of the month programs from the Greece Historical Society are sponsored by members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter. Space for the second Tuesdays of the month programs is provided by the Greece Public Library.
The Highland Park Children's Pavilion, presented November 8th, 2022.
Before I introduce our speaker, she was written about in a Greece news magazine. There's the author right here. So I have a few copies.
The photographer, not the author.
Oh, the photographer. I'm sorry. Okay.
No, that's okay.
I got a few copies. I'll just pass them around. If you didn't get one, it's a very local distribution in Greece. So if you're on the other side of the tracks, you don't get it, I guess. So why don't I just leave them up here, and if you want one at the end. Okay, so our speaker tonight is Joann Beck. Joann was a City of Rochester senior landscape architect for over 20 years. Her projects gained local, statewide, and national recognition for the city, most notably for the Genesee Riverway Trail at Turning Point Park. Before coming to Rochester, she worked as a principal at a multidisciplinary design firm, Environmental Design and Research in Syracuse. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts at Lake Forest College in Illinois and Master's at SUNY College for Environmental Science and Forestry at Syracuse, where she was also a visiting assistant professor. She retired from practice landscape architecture in 2016. But she didn't really retire. She is a member of the board of the Maplewood Neighborhood Association, the chair of the Rochester Olmsted Parks Alliance, and is president of the Highland Park Conservancy. So you are probably about as high-paid volunteer as I am, right? Very good. So let's welcome Joann, longtime friend and co-worker. Go ahead. I'm gonna.
Well, hi everybody. Is this good? If I wander away, just signal and I'll wander back. Thank you, Bill, and thanks to the Greece Historical Society for inviting me to talk about the Highland Park Children's Pavilion, something that has been the major project of the Highland Park Conservancy for a long, long time. What we have, first before I start, how many people actually experienced the Children's Pavilion? How many remember it? Oh, okay. That makes me very happy. I myself never saw it in person, only in photographs. And before I start, I want to introduce some people in the audience, starting with the wonderful Quinn family. Mark Quinn and Rebecca Quinn. Mark is the superintendent of horticulture for Monroe County Parks, and he is expert in the whole range of knowledge that you need to really keep the parks as glorious as they are. We're always grateful for Mark's expertise. And Rebecca is the leader of a Girl Scout troop of daisies. And this past year, she developed a program leading to a Girl Scout badge, an Olmsted Girl Scout badge. And it's been adopted by Girl Scouts of America. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. So, and I'd like to introduce two important volunteers from Highland Park Conservancy, Mary Vandelot and Mary Kirkendale, who are always willing to give their time and help us out in a lot of different ways. Thank you. Thanks for coming. And thank everybody else for coming. I'm really happy to talk about this project, and especially this year, which is the bicentennial of Frederick Law Olmsted. So up on the screen we have the logo for Highland Park Conservancy and the logo for the Olmsted Bicentennial. And this has been a really the discussion and the research and the work that has come out of the Olmsted Bicentennial has been really rich, and I have learned an awful lot this year related to the nationwide celebration of the bicentennial. Okay, so we're gonna make sure that these arrows work. Okay, so here is the Children's Pavilion on Dedication Day, September 29th, 1890. It was the first, this was the beginning. It was the end of a long period of many of the city's leaders trying to get a public park system. From the 1840s on, Ellwanger and Barry, who had the biggest nursery in the whole nation here in Rochester, had been advocating for public parks. And toward the end of the life cycle of their business, they donated the initial 22 acres to create Highland Park, and they also donated the $7,000 to build that building. So it was the end of a long process of providing this civic resource to Rochester, but it was the beginning of the Rochester and the Monroe County park system, which is just a marvelous, enormous and marvelous resource for this community. So Highland Park was really the first big municipal park. And Ellwanger and Barry were not interested in, anything that was less than world class. They were national figures, not only as businessmen, but they wrote in horticultural magazines. They were known all over the country. They were not interested in, anything second rate. So, they set the standard for the development of this park, which is an iconic park in Rochester. Okay. So, they advocated for a really good design. They had, their nursery had been a destination in Rochester, and they had been friends with all the leading garden designers and horticulturists across the country. And so when the Rochester Parks Commission thought about how this should happen, they interviewed really a whole bunch of qualified people, but they went to Buffalo to ask their advice. Buffalo had the very first municipal park system in the country, designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. In Buffalo, people in Buffalo said, "Listen, don't fool around. Hire the best, and then follow his lead." And so they hired Frederick Law Olmsted, who was the preeminent, and is still the preeminent landscape architect of all time. And on this side we have the original Olmsted plan. You can see there were some elements that were given. You can see South Avenue, Goodman Street, Highland Avenue, those were pre-existing. The reservoir was pre-existing, and Reservoir Avenue. And then all of that land in between those was the canvas for this design. The former historian for Central Park Conservancy, Sarah Cedar Miller, has said that Central Park, the design for Central Park, was the greatest work of American art of the 19th century. And, when you think about it, it really was, it really changed the way communities thought about how they wanted their community, what they wanted for their community. And Highland Park is no less a work of art of enormous scale. And you can see some of the elements in the design. You can see along the top edge that really, really dense planting that is by design intended to provide a buffer between the park space and the developed city. You can see the open meadow areas, and along the slope above Highland Avenue, between Highland Avenue and the reservoir, you can see this pattern of very, very complex pattern of plantings. It's not so easy to see the paths on this plan, but because of the image. But I think that you can really pick out the formal planting along the drives and the pattern, and of course you can see the children's pavilion as right in the center of the design. And on the other side, that is an aerial photo, an historic aerial photo of the park. It was built as designed, which doesn't always happen, we know, but in this case, it was built as designed, and there you go. So those were the two-dimensional images, but Highland Park is three-dimensional. It's a landform park, and this aerial photo really, from sort of the Goodman Street, from sort of the Highland Avenue, Goodman Street, looking up at the reservoir, you can see that this was meant to be a landform park. You can see the children's pavilion up at the corner, and the reservoir. The relationship of the children's pavilion and the reservoir was developed. There's at least a 10-foot elevation increase from the reservoir level up to the level of the overlook children's pavilion, and that was by design and constructed for that purpose. When you go there today, it's a great big round flat space that wasn't there before the park it was created. Okay, so we all know Highland Park as the place with all the beautiful lilacs and something blooming all the time, something of interest to see every single day of the year. One of the ways that those things are revealed to us in a very meaningful way is through the structure of the design. And this is, this is a shot of the very same location, looking down into the gully. In the winter and the summer, it functions for sledding and for just quiet gathering. And really, this is probably pretty close to the same vantage point for these photos. When we were doing our history video, we were looking for places in the park where we could do interviews and not have a lot of, background noise. And so this was really the place. It really has an enclosed and serene kind of atmosphere by design. The plants, of course, went in according to the original plan, and they grew up over time to reinforce the sense of place and the spaces that were envisioned. So, one of the remarkable things, it's always remarkable to me, that the landscape architectural design requires a lot of imagination when it's first installed. It requires a lot of time to, really come to fruition. It's basically based on growth rate of the vegetation. And, Highland Park today is the full realization of that planting design. I mean, it's always changing, but the Children's Pavilion was built first so that there would be a destination and someplace to go and to see while the plants were growing in. Now, Olmsted was a writer before he was a landscape architect. And so we do not have to guess at all about what his intent was. He wrote voluminously about every single project. And when people say, well, if Olmsted were here today, he would do, nope, we know. He told us what exactly he intended for all of these spaces. And the Children's Pavilion is no exception. This quote is from a letter that was from a letter to the parks, to one of the parks officials that was published in the D&C at the time. Same with this. Can everybody see that, or should I read it? Okay. It was meant to be sort of a beacon on the horizon. It was always meant to be the focal point of the park. And it was always meant to provide, to borrow landscape. I mean, this was only 22 acres of land, which, given the scope of the work that Olmsted was doing at the time, I mean, at the same time that he was working in Rochester, he was working on the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago. He was working on Biltmore Estate in North Carolina, which is square miles in area. And in Rochester, he's working on 22 acres. So, there was no way that it was just going to be limited to the 22 acres. He was borrowing the view. And the best view, the most scenic view, was to the south. And the Children's Pavilion was really the way that he was able to do that. You could get up there and look out and get a sense of the context of the whole city. And these are historic photos from the pavilion. So that view to the south was particularly important. The view to the north was, going to be of the city, and so that was going to be buffered with the Pinetum. So thinking ahead to how this would develop over time, the whole south slope, that whole slope above Highland Avenue, was really intended to support a shrub collection so that a regular arboretum wouldn't grow up and block the view. And so that was really the genesis of the marvelous collection of shrubs and, the world-class collection of lilacs that we have today. Now, Olmsted was not a flower person, and he was not an expert horticulturist, but Rochester had all of these trained people from the nursery industry, and developed in-house. The Parks Department developed in-house the ability to develop this collection, which is the world's largest collection of lilacs. The building itself was designed by the architectural firm Shepley, Rutan, and Coolidge. This is how it works when you have a complicated design. You have members of a design team who have different expertise. So Olmsted designed the park and the whole concept, and to do the contract documents for the pavilion, he had the best architect at his disposal at the time. So this architectural firm is the successor firm to Henry Hobson Richardson, who had died in 1886, and his firm continued on. They were, among the most, if not the most prominent, among the most prominent architects in the country at the time. And so the structure itself has the distinction of really refined architectural design. And I love this picture with all the photos, with all the people. You can really get a sense of the scale. Oops. Okay. So the pavilion was demolished in 1963. It was up for 73 years, and towards the end it required, some considerable maintenance that just, wasn't available at that time. This was the urban renewal era. This was, like the low point for the park system in Rochester. They're really, this is the period when the city gave a whole quadrant of Genesee Valley Park to the University of Rochester, and that's another story. And really, the demolition, they thought the only solution here was to demolish the Children's Pavilion. They went to the city, which is the owner. Okay, I have to back up. In the 60s, the city and the county agreed that the county would operate certain of the large parks. And so the county, the county had the maintenance responsibility starting in, I think, 1961. But the city remains the owner to this day. It's, I think it's a 100-year agreement, so it goes till 2061. But before they could proceed with demolition of the pavilion, they went to City Council to ask permission. And we found the City Council resolution which grants permission on the condition that the county rebuild it in kind. So that's what we're doing. It's kind of about time. But really, the community has asked for, has advocated for the reconstruction of the pavilion since at least 1994. Before Highland Park Conservancy really was founded, there was a group committee to reconstruct the children's committee children's pavilion that was part of the Southeast Area Coalition, and they sponsored the feasibility study by Barrow Associates Architects, which was a very, very, very professional, detailed study, which remains very important. And we have used their, have updated the cost estimates from this feasibility study many times to apply for grants and to, you know, to get a good idea of what today's cost would be. So that was a really important step toward reconstructing the Children's Pavilion, and that was 20 years ago. This past April, the county legislature voted to fully fund the reconstruction project and to accept a grant of $500,000 from the state Office of Parks, Recreation, Historic Preservation, a grant of $500,000 from the state municipal something grant, and $1 million from Highland Park Conservancy. Our community has you know, contributed over $1 million in private contributions toward this project, and it's kind of a remarkable thing. So the schedule, as I understand it, is that the county has actually started the project by starting the process of hiring a design consultant who can do the contract documents, and is scheduled to do a groundbreaking about this time next year and complete the project in 2024. In addition, right now, there is a county project to reconstruct construct new restrooms on the footprint of the restroom building that's at the Overlook. So, and that project will be done this year, I think.
Should be opened by Lilac Festival.
By Lilac Festival. So, so that's going to be a terrific addition to people who want to go and spend a day in the park. And okay, Frederick Law Olmsted. So, one of the things that has been really wonderful about this bicentennial year has been the examination of the life of Frederick Law Olmsted and the enormity of his contribution. He was a transformative figure in American history. He did more than any number of things that would earn him that level of acclaim. Before he before he became a landscape architect, he was a journalist, and his travels in the South before the Civil War, reporting on the South during slavery, was of terrific significance to the debate about the Civil War, to really illuminating the South under slavery. I mean, I really cannot even imagine living at a time when human slavery was legal. It's just kind of unimaginable. And he traveled in the South, and he wrote these really illuminating analyses that, were first-person accounts of the life, not only of the slaves, but the roads, the level of infrastructure. This was a police state. All the money went to that, and there was no investment in civic improvements, roads, bridges, libraries, schools. It was a very, very different culture, and he brought that to light. And his articles have been collected and printed as in a book called The Cotton Kingdom, which has never been out of print. It remains a really important source for historians, and that alone was a remarkable achievement. And there was always, and then during the Civil War, of course, he headed up the Sanitary Commission, which was the forerunner of the Red Cross. It was basically disaster relief, and the Civil War was the biggest disaster that had ever, maybe the biggest disaster in our history. There was no precedent for how you deal with, first of all, the health of the troops, and then the human cost of the conflict. And all of that added up to his approach to designing Central Park. He believed that every citizen should be treated equally and have equal access to the benefits of society, and Central Park really is the material demonstration of that philosophy. Okay, how did I get back there? Okay, Frederick Law Olmsted. So always before, you would see, well, Frederick Law Olmsted, famous landscape architect, he did this, he did this, he did this. This year, people have really started to articulate how traveling in the South and analyzing the economy and the culture of slavery, how dealing with the carnage of the Civil War, how dealing with just the times in which he lived, when we had no vaccines, no public health infrastructure, and childhood mortality was heartbreaking. It was horrible, and it was heartbreaking. So all of these things added up to a philosophy of life and a philosophy of design that was revolutionary. And once it was demonstrated in Central Park, the whole country stood up and noticed and wanted their own Central Park. So this was a real turning point in history. Okay, so this is This is obviously 2 photos of the Gloriette at the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, Austria. And this is here so that I can illustrate how design is the material expression of values. Now this is a glorious place, right? You pay your admission, you get to go. Go in and experience it. It was the summer palace of the Habsburgs in the mid 18th century. And of course, Olmsted didn't invent the idea that if you had a high point, you wanted to use it for the view. That's the purpose of the Gloriette in this estate. This is on the very high point of the property, overlooking. To see the water in front of the structure is the water in the foreground of this. So we're looking at the structure and then turning around and looking at the view from the structure to the mansion, well, it's more than a mansion, the palace, 1,400 rooms of it. And this design is, it's all about an expression of imperial power, of control, it's glorious. Those little dots that you can see in the center, though, those are people. Those hedges, those clipped hedges on the edge there, those are at least 2 stories high. This is a place of massive scale, very geometric, very, very controlled, and you get to feel like an ant. Now, this is Highland Park, and this comes from a whole different way of thinking about how people interact with their environment. This is meant to connect people to natural beauty and to our common human needs for relief. And this is a place where you can walk off the path, run, leap. In the case of this little guy at the bottom of the slope, roll. And the planting design is very complex. There's loads and loads of things of interest at every time of the year. It comes from an entirely different place, and I always key in on this sense of enlarged freedom. So Olmsted saw his parks as the expression of a republic composed of free people. Okay, that just changed on its own, right? And he wrote about it. We don't have to guess. These are his words. They happen to have been expressed about the design of Prospect Park in Brooklyn, but they really apply. So the parks were meant not only for the benefit of all of us individually, but also for the benefit of society as a whole, as a democratizing space where everybody could feel at home and where everybody could be in company of everybody else. And, well, he said it best. So I'll read this. For people to come together for the single purpose of enjoyment, unembarrassed by the limitations with which they are surrounded at home or in pursuit of their daily avocations or of such amusements as are elsewhere offered. Like pool halls, like you know, the Music Man. Go out into the park. Okay, this is another example of a structure in an Olmsted Park. This happens to be Patterson Park in Baltimore, and it was renovated in recent years, and it was just all over the design news. And you could see the view, a taste of the view from that structure. And of course, Olmsted did not design the High Line, but I put this in for a couple of reasons. Throughout our campaign to raise funds to build the Children's Pavilion, people would ask us, well, you go up there, and then what do you do? Like, are you going to have screens? Are you going to have things? Are you going to have things for people to do? And no. This is the anti-screen experience. And just like the High Line, just like any other park. And you can see that these are in two different seasons. The people on the left are in jackets, and you can't go there without seeing 1 million people. It just is. And what is there to do there? You walk along, you look at the view, you have an elevated view over some places over a very ordinary landscape. Some places it's enhanced with plantings. Another thing that people have asked, the reconstructed Children's Pavilion will have an elevator so that everybody can use it. And it's the law. The High Line has 5 elevators, 5 outdoor elevators. You can see one in the view on the left. It's not rocket science. It just needs to be engineered correctly and installed correctly. Okay, so Rochester's Olmsted legacy is enormous. He designed Highland Park as the very first municipal park and as the sort of the keystone of a park system, which includes Genesee Valley Park and Seneca Park. And that system is one of only a handful in this country. Now, the Olmsted firm, the firm that Olmsted founded, lasted until 1979 or 1980, under his direction, then the direction of his sons, and then the successor firm. And in that time, they did thousands and thousands of projects. This book is just a list of Olmsted projects. It's only a list. I mean, this is an enormous body of work. But Rochester has one of only a handful of park systems. So that was the beginning. But it continued after that, because after Olmsted Sr. retired, now Olmsted Sr. was the one who directed the park system. After he retired, the city retained the firm, John Charles and Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., who were great landscape architects in their own rights, to design Cobb's Hill Park, and a whole series of small parks and squares, including Washington Square, Jones Square, Susan B. Anthony Square, Lunsford Circle, I'm not going to be able to think of all of them, and some of them have been chopped in half by the inner loop or by expressways. But there was this, Lakeview Park. There was a whole series of municipal parks. And who built these parks? The Parks Department, which had an army of people. They built them with, shovels and horse-drawn carts, and these were enormous public works projects. But when, George Eastman and Dr. Durand gifted Durand-Eastman Park to the city, there was this whole army of people who had built the parks and trained under the direction of the Olmsteds, and they built Durand-Eastman, and it feels and it looks like an Olmsted Park, but it isn't. There was not one Olmsted plan. The Parks Department just knew what they were doing, and it's part of our Olmsted legacy. So it's very, very deep. On the right is the 1911 plan, which was for the whole city, which was done by Olmsted Brothers with a planner whose name I'm not remembering. I'm sorry. And some of those greenways were, you can find them today. So a lot of it didn't happen. This is, not everything that's planned is implemented, but there was a very long, continuous involvement of the Olmsteds in Rochester. So this summer at Chautauqua Institute, there was a panel discussion with Stephanie Crockett from the Buffalo Friends of Olmsted Parks, Dr. Robert Shipley from University of Buffalo, and Dr. Roman from University of Buffalo about Olmsted in the future. And this is why it's important. This is why what we have is important, because we have this wonderful resource. Cities can't, the Tulsa, Oklahoma, decided that they needed an Olmsted Park. And so, they spent $144 million to build an Olmsted Park. And it's not an Olmsted Park. You can't do an Olmsted Park because we have the originals, and they have a gorgeous park, and they have $144 million worth, but we have more. We have more than $144 million worth that we have had for 132 years. So Olmsted was all about, he was way ahead of his time. He had this vision that was not only extensive in geographic scope, but in terms of time and the future. And so he really, his work really addresses building human community, building social equity. He wrote the book on ecological resilience. The Emerald Necklace in Boston is an enormous flood control, water quality project that is also a wonderful greenway park system. Disaster relief, he wrote the book that the Red Cross then took and became the Red Cross. It was all about preserving health, speaking to the common human needs that we all have, and providing them. And this is our final slide, and it's basically summing up the whole story: to give the lungs a bath of pure sunny air, And the best illustration of that I could find, although I'm sure that there are many, many, many photographs of people in the parks that would show that. So 132 years of having this wonderful resource. Any questions?
If they got a question, I'm gonna use them. Anybody have any questions or comments?
I have to use that.
No, I want it so I can hear it. All right, go ahead. Yes, it is.
Are they going to follow the same plans that the original building was built?
Oh, good question. We don't.
What was the question?
Are they going to follow the original plans for the children's pavilion when they rebuild it? We don't actually have the original plans. We have some measured drawings, engineering drawings, and we have a lot of photographic documentation. And I think the intent will be to build it to the same size and scale and character. But of course there will be an elevator. There will be some changes to materials for greater durability, and it will be a new building. It can't look like a replica,
Right.
but it will have the same scale and style.
Okay.
I got one. What is the Highland Park Conservancy? It's like the Friends of the Mount Hope Cemetery.
Oh.
Is it?
Oh, good question. I meant to say that at the very first slide. So Highland Park Conservancy is an all-volunteer parks advocacy group. We're the official park friends group for Highland Park. We have an agreement with the county that allowed us to, fundraise and for the project. But we are an all-volunteer outfit.
Will the view looking south, once the pavilion's rebuilt, will it look the same, or has there been a lot? Is there anything blocking the view right now? Or?
Well, this is a great question, and I can answer it because when the county executive did the announcement of the funding of the project, there was a scissor lift brought to the site, and everybody who came to the announcement at the overlook got to go up to the level of the third story of the pavilion to get the view. And there were no complaints about the view. Of course it's changed. Of course there are, it's more developed. One person remarked about the psych center, which is scheduled to be demolished, and we'll see how long that takes. But really, the view is still really lovely.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No? Okay, I guess we're...
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button for more content and hit that bell icon to get notified when there's more bicentennial snapshots. You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. You can follow us on Twitter at GreeceNYHistory. And you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road.